Good afternoon. I'm Jessica Polk of the Current Consulting Group. Welcome to Marijuana, Oral Fluid, and the Future of Drug Testing. Today's presentation is brought to you by the Current Consulting Group and is sponsored by DrugPak. We'd like to thank DrugPak for sponsoring today's webinar presentation. We're excited to hear from today's webinar sponsor, and so we'll go ahead and we'll turn the presentation over to them for a video presentation.
Hi, I'm David Gonsalves, General Manager of DrugPak. We're excited to be sponsoring today's presentation on marijuana, oral fluid, and the future of drug testing. Before I turn the virtual microphone over to Bill Current of the Current Consulting Group, I want to share a few things about DrugPak that I think you will find very interesting. When DrugPak first came out more than 30 years ago, it was really the only comprehensive drug testing management software of its kind. Of course, back in those days, DrugPak was an off-the-shelf product built to meet the needs of drug testing providers then and into the foreseeable future. As Bill will talk about today, drug abuse trends change from year to year, and drug testing methods have evolved in many significant ways. For that reason, DrugPak has changed as well, always with an eye toward meeting the current and future needs of third-party administrators, medical review officers, background screening companies, and employers that rely on our services each and every day. The DrugPak of today is a web-based, comprehensive, flexible, and fully scalable management system that makes it possible for providers to meet their clients' needs in a streamlined, efficient, and cost-effective manner. At the same time, employers can use DrugPak to manage their own programs internally when it makes more sense to do it that way. In other words, the 2022 version of DrugPak is a much more robust and state-of-the-art service that can meet the management needs of both employers and drug testing providers. If you've not taken a close look at DrugPak lately, or if you're a current user but you haven't fully investigated all of the advanced features we now offer, you'll enjoy this short video overview.
As a drug testing professional, you need to do more than just process test results. You need to be responsive, ensure quality, communicate with your team and your customers, and watch your bottom line. For over 30 years, companies like yours have trusted DrugPak to help manage every aspect of their drug testing programs. Today, DrugPak offers a fully hosted, cloud-based system that is secure, scalable, and mobile-friendly. Whether you have one location or many, 2 users or thousands of them, they all can use DrugPak from any modern browser on any operating system, desktop, tablet, or mobile phone, anytime, day or night. DrugPak can help you manage your result processing of DOT and non-mandated testing, including alternative sample types, and more. In fact, DrugPak's workflows and third-party integrations comprise a complete ecosystem for your entire testing service. But the real power of DrugPak is in its flexible automation. Data imports, quality control, medical review and release, electronic fax and paper reporting, invoice generation, scientifically valid random selections, and more can all be automated as much or as little as you like. Set up rules to automate just the processes you want to, under precise conditions that you define. Our cloud-based system runs around the clock 365 days a year, doing this work for you. DrugPak helps you harness the power of the latest technologies to control, automate, and oversee your business, anytime, anywhere. To learn more, visit drugpak.com. There you can watch more videos, explore our Knowledge Center, or contact our sales team. You can even experience DP Web for yourself, risk-free, on our live demo.
Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and that it piqued your curiosity. I'm biased, of course, but I'm confident in saying that DrugPak is the best web-based, fully automated drug testing management system available today. Our dual objectives are to help you save time and money by making your day-to-day operations as smooth as possible. If you have questions, please contact me and I'll be happy to walk you through all the features of today's DrugPak. And now it's time to hear from Bill Current on marijuana, oral fluid, and the future of drug testing.
Well, thank you very much, David, and thank you, DrugPak, for sponsoring today's presentation. This is a really I think, very important topic. We had a tremendous registration number, a lot of people interested in this, and so we've got a lot of ground to cover. Let me start out by saying, as you can see there in the middle paragraph, I started this company in 1998. So this September, we'll celebrate our 24th anniversary, and a lot has changed. One of the first things we did in 1999 was conduct a survey of the drug testing industry, and then later added a survey of employers. And I'm going to include some information from last year's surveys in today's presentation to sort of give you a flavor of what employers are saying about drug testing trends, testing for marijuana, oral fluids, etc. And I'll also be presenting the results of our 2022 industry survey in just a couple of weeks at the NDASA conference in Indianapolis. I hope you'll join us at that conference. So here's our agenda: the current state of marijuana use, testing for marijuana and the truth about impairment. There's a lot of misinformation about marijuana impairment out there. Why oral fluid testing could be right for you, SAMHSA's oral fluid guidelines, and DOT's notice of proposed rulemaking that just came out on February 28th. We'll talk about measuring return on investment from oral fluid testing, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of a flavor of what I think the future of drug testing looks like with a few predictions. So we'll get this in. We'll leave time for questions and answers at the end, so please feel free to submit any questions that you would like us to address, whether it's in today's presentation or anything related to drug testing. So the current state of marijuana use. You all know what this is. This is the marijuana map. These are the states that have legalized marijuana either for recreational, quote unquote, adult use of marijuana. Those are the orange states, and medical marijuana. Those are the blue states. Now, all of the orange states have medical marijuana laws already in place. They did before they legalized recreational marijuana. The blue states are among those that are considering recreational marijuana laws in some cases. But if you take the totality of what you see on the screen, it's nearly 80% of the states in our country that have legalized marijuana one way or the other. Many other states, the ones in white that have not legalized marijuana, have actually decriminalized some forms of marijuana use and marijuana possession. But as we look at this map, I think the message I want you to come away from is, don't be intimidated by the map. There is a lot employers can and must do to address marijuana in the workplace. But let's look at a few facts first as we build our case for that. So every year, the federal government comes out with a report called the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. It's always 1 year behind. So in 2021, the study came out, the survey came out, and it showed results from 2020. So that's why you see at the top line, marijuana use up from 2019 to 2020, which was reported in 2021. Later this year, probably August, September timeframe, we'll see the 2021 study, which will be referred to as the 2022 report. But look at that increase in marijuana from 7.5% to 17.9%, 49.6 million people reporting that they are regular users of marijuana. When you're talking about tens of millions, a 0.4, 0.5% increase is considered statistically significant. So marijuana up dramatically. Other categories like psychotherapeutics, those are the antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, down a decrease from 2019 from 5.9% to 5.8%. Even though it's a smaller percentage, 16 million that we're dealing with, that would not be considered a statistically significant drop. So marijuana use up, other forms of drug abuse like cocaine, hallucinogens, etc., holding their ground. And in some cases actually going up, which I'll share with you in a second. But focusing on marijuana, we know that use is up, we know that the fear of risk of harm is down, and that millions of people last year in 2020, as reported in 2021, tried marijuana for the first time. Now look at the statistics there under marijuana use among adults 26 and older. It increased from 7% in 2002 to nearly 20% almost 18 years later. That's a tremendous, tremendous impact. And what has happened during those nearly 20 years? Well, the legalization of marijuana is what's happened. And so as a result, there is a decrease in the perceived risk of harm among those 12 and older from 36% in 2015 to 27% in 2020. And as a result, last year, 2.8 million people admitted that they tried marijuana for the first time. So we've got more first-time users because there's less concern or fear of harm from using marijuana. And even among the older age group of adults, 26 and older, marijuana use is up. Now, every year, Quest Diagnostics comes out with something called the Drug Testing Index, the DTI. This is one of the most important studies that comes out every year. The National Survey on Drug Use and Health, the Drug Testing Index, and then Current Consulting Group's annual survey of the drug testing industry. I think those are the three true barometers of where we're going with drug abuse and drug testing. According to the DTI, which just came out a couple of weeks ago, positivity rates for marijuana in the general workforce, not DOT, the general workforce, which is about 6 million urine tests that they are reporting the results of, they showed an upward climb in positivity of 8.3%. So it increased from 3.6 to 3.9 between 2020 and 2021. According to the DTI report, that was the highest positivity rate ever reported in the history of the Quest Drug Testing Index. Over a 5-year period, positivity for marijuana in the general US workforce, again, not counting their DOT tests, increased 50% over that 5-year period. Marijuana positivity particularly surged in states with legal, recreational, or adult use marijuana laws, over 118% between 2012 and 2020. And then look at that last bullet, the overall positivity rate in the combined US workforce. So that's DOT and non-DOT drug tests conducted by Quest based on nearly 9 million tests, okay, between January and December 2021, up in 2021 to 4.6% compared to 4.4% in 2020, and up 31.4% from the all-time low of 3.5% just 10 years ago. So just 10 years ago, Quest reported the all-time low in positivity rates, according to the DTI, and it's gone up 31.4% since that time. Dramatic increase in positive drug test results. And it's not just marijuana. So this is a report that came out from DISA Global Solutions, one of the largest drug testing third-party administrators, where they showed their increase in positive results from random testing in 4 different drug categories between 2019 and 2020. So marijuana was up about 20%, cocaine was down about 5%, I think it was. But look at the increase in opioid and amphetamine positives. Between 2019 and 2020, positives for those 2 drugs up dramatically. Opioids, the synthetic opioids, hydrocodone, oxycodone, etc., up over 273% in 1 year, and up over 215% for amphetamines in 1 year. And look what's really interesting about this bar graph is it illustrates that amphetamine positives in random tests were actually higher than marijuana positives. So as dramatically high as marijuana positives are, between 2019 and 2020, the increase in amphetamine positives pushed it up above marijuana positives. This again for random drug testing. Now, DISA does a lot of different testing for a lot of different industries. So it's not just safety sensitive, but they do a lot of safety sensitive, a lot of DOT mandated, a lot of oil and gas industry, one of the probably the biggest provider in that market. And so they're testing a lot of safety sensitive workers. And when you see the positive results from the random tests in opioids and amphetamines, it tells us that we've got a problem. It's not just marijuana anymore, but it's opioids and amphetamines. My guess is that as the barrier comes down for marijuana, I think people are emboldened to try other drugs as well, like opioids and amphetamines. Now, in the Current Consulting Group survey last year, we asked employers, this was in the employer survey, we asked if they were considering removing marijuana from their drug test panel in the next 12 months. 9% said yes, 69% said no, 21% still considering it. They're not sure. But that 9% is significant because if we had asked that question 10 years ago, the percentage would have been less than 1%. I'm convinced that in about the last 10 years, we've seen a dramatic increase in employers that are not only discontinuing testing for marijuana, but are considering discontinuing testing for marijuana. And that's important. But why they're considering removing marijuana from the drug test panel, excuse me, is significant as well. Look at the second bar down, 41.67%, concerned about lawsuits and legal liability if they continue to test for marijuana. And the next one down, 12.5%, said testing for marijuana is not permitted in the states where they have operations, the states and cities. And then the last bar, 29.1%, we cannot hire new employees due to marijuana positive drug tests. Let me first address the middle one, 12.5%. Testing for marijuana is not permitted in our state. Testing for marijuana is legal in every state, even in New York, which has theoretically banned all workplace testing for marijuana, but they left a couple of big giant loopholes in their regulations, which we'll talk about in a minute. But testing for marijuana is not illegal in any state. There may be conditions placed on employers with what they can do with a positive test result for marijuana, or restrictions on discriminating against legal medical marijuana users, okay? But testing for marijuana, legal in every state. There is, though, a lot of legitimacy to that the first bar I talked about, 41.67% of employers dropping marijuana or considering dropping marijuana because of lawsuits and legal liability if we test. It's not really the drug user or the marijuana user that you should be afraid of, though, if you fall into that category. It's the innocent bystander, the innocent coworker, the innocent client or customer who gets injured by one of your workers while high on marijuana on the job and causes an accident that harms another person. Those lawsuits from respondeat superior and negligent hiring laws are what you should really be afraid of, which would encourage and inspire you to continue testing for marijuana and not remove it from your drug testing panel. So one of the things that's really key in the marijuana issue as it relates to what I just talked about is the whole issue of impairment. So first, let's say, let's understand that the good news is, yes, it's legal to test for marijuana. There may be some conditions, as I just mentioned, but yes, marijuana is legal, or testing for marijuana is legal in every state. Some people say, well, Bill, what if Congress approves marijuana? What if they legalize it or decriminalize it? It will not necessarily make it legal in every state. There's a big difference between decriminalizing marijuana, which makes small amounts of marijuana possession not a violation of law, and legalizing marijuana, which many of these states have done. So what Congress is talking about doing would not go nearly as far as many of these other states have gone. And in all of those states, you can still test for marijuana. So the bottom line is you can test for marijuana in all 50 states with some very, very strict conditions in New York, which again, I'll talk about in a minute. What's important to look for in marijuana laws is workplace specific language that talks about not discriminating against legal users of marijuana. These are registered medical marijuana users typically. And making sure in the law that there's some language that individuals may not use marijuana or be under its influence while at work. Those are the two key things to look for if you're in a state or states that have legalized marijuana. Look for those two clauses in your legal marijuana law. They're almost always there. But as a company, you want to make it clear that, and you're going to do this in your drug testing policy, that as an employer, regardless of what the state marijuana law may say, you're not legally obligated to allow employees to bring marijuana to work, to use marijuana while at work, or to be at work impaired by or under the influence of marijuana. There's no law that requires you to let people use marijuana on the job or be impaired by marijuana. And you want to clarify that and make it clear in your drug testing policy. And one of the key issues when it comes to the legalization of marijuana and what employers can and cannot do is the whole question of impairment. There are people out there, even in the drug testing industry, I'm sorry to say, that would have us believe that impairment for marijuana is a very, very short period of time, that somebody's only impaired for marijuana for the first 20 minutes, maybe the first hour or two, and then after they're not impaired anymore. But impairment is caused by and influenced by lots of different factors. You have to take all of that into account, including what you're asking the individual to do. So the individual's drug use history, how frequently they use the drug, the level of tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, that's in the marijuana that person's using, how they use it, smoking it versus eating a marijuana-laced brownie, for example. And again, what you're asking the person to do, all influence whether that individual is still impaired. Now, a study came out from the University of Sydney, which came out just last summer, so this is really fresh stuff, that looked at over 60 studies on impairment from around the world. And they came to the conclusion that impairment from marijuana lasts anywhere from 3 to 10 hours or longer, depending again on what you're asking someone to do. Drive a truck, operate a forklift, or simply remember instructions. Those all factor in to what level of cognitive or psychomotor ability impairment that individual may be experiencing. But it's not a 20-minute thing. It's not a 2-hour thing. Impairment can last for up to 10 hours or longer, again, depending on the task being performed. So if you're using a testing method with a very short window of detection of say 2 to 3 hours, you're missing 70 to 80% of the people who may have caused an accident while impaired by marijuana, because the window of impairment is generally up to 10 hours. And it depends again on the drug as well. Now look at cannabis. The window of effect and possible impairment is from 10 minutes to 10 hours, with residual effects in specific behaviors, right? The kind of task being done for up to 24 hours. So if you're in a safety sensitive industry and you have people operating forklifts or heavy machinery, etc., you want a drug testing method that can detect THC for that full 10-hour window of impairment, not just the first 15, 20 minutes, and certainly, not days from now. You want something with a tight window of detection that covers that full 3 to 10-hour window of impairment. So when you look at the major drug testing methods that are available, the three major ones are oral fluid, urine, and hair, and then blood and breath are sort of really outliers, but I put them on here to be able to show you the difference. 3 of them, breath, blood, and oral fluid, claim to be able to detect drug use immediately after somebody uses drugs, within say 10 to 15 minutes. Urine can't do that. The reason is that in oral fluid, for example, you're detecting the parent drug, the drug itself, which becomes detectable in an oral fluid sample within minutes after ingestion. With urine, you're detecting a metabolite of the drug. So there's a period of 6, 7, 8 hours before the drug can be detected in urine, because it takes about that long for the drug to metabolize, or for the body to metabolize the drug in its system. With hair, it's going to be several days, maybe 7 to 10 days, but then the window of detection is going to stay open for about 3 months. So if you're looking for lifestyle drug detection, urine, hair, perfect. If you're looking for recent use detection, but one that covers the entire window of impairment, then you're probably looking at oral fluid. Breath is going to be too short. You're going to miss 70, 80% of the positives that you should be detecting. And with urine, you're not going to get any positives during that first 7 to 8 hours. But with oral fluid, because it detects drug use from the very beginning, just minutes after somebody's used a drug, and beyond even the 10 hours of the 3 to 10 hour window of impairment, you're going to capture all of that period of impairment from cannabis use. So of all the different drug testing methods, oral fluid is the only one that can capture drug use or marijuana use for the entire window of impairment of 3 to 10 hours. Now, why is understanding the window of impairment important? Well, that's going to help you choose the type of drug testing method that's going to be right for you. Remember, we've got lab-based urine and instant result or rapid result urine. We've got lab-based oral fluid and instant result rapid oral fluid testing. And we've got hair testing, which of course is a lab-based test. If you understand the window of impairment and then you compare it to your circumstances, understanding the window of impairment for marijuana will help you choose the drug testing method that's best for you. And you'll understand when a positive drug test can correlate possibly with the possibility of impairment from a specific drug. If you go back to that chart, you're going to have access to these slides, so you'll be able to look at that chart in more detail. This is important because in many states, actually in a growing number of states, like Illinois, for example, an employer can test for marijuana, but they can't necessarily take adverse employment action against someone who tests positive for marijuana. unless there's a link, some type of evidence that the individual was also impaired at the time of an accident or the reasonable suspicion test, etc. The closer you can get to that 3 to 10 hour window of impairment, the closer you can make a correlation to the possibility of impairment. There may be other things, right, that you're looking at, like increased absenteeism, tardiness, conflict in the workplace, increased accidents, a lack of productivity, etc. That's being observed by supervisors regardless of whether there's drug use, right? It's cause agnostic in that sense. But you're looking at sort of a combination of a paper trail of aberrant behavior with a positive drug test result that fits within that window of impairment for cannabis of 3 to 10 hours. And so understanding the window of impairment and the window of detection of these different drug testing methods is going to help you make a decision about which testing method is best for you under which circumstances. Now, with that in mind, let me give you just a little bit of some ideas on how to address marijuana in the workplace, and then we're going to go into some legal issues with laws and regulations. First, have a policy. Everybody that does drug testing, every company should have a drug testing policy. We've been writing drug testing policies for the entire 24 years we've been in business. And one year we asked employers in our employer survey, how long has it been since you updated your policy? It was astounding how many companies were willing to admit they hadn't updated it in at least 1 to 3 years, and some beyond 3 years. You should update your policy every year, especially if you're in states that have legalized marijuana. You want that policy to be clear about the company's position on marijuana use in the workplace, and that it will not be tolerated in the workplace. Be clear that employees may not be impaired by marijuana while on the job. Yes, state that you comply with the laws that apply to you. Don't discriminate against registered medical marijuana users. That's when fear of a possible lawsuit comes into place. Don't discriminate against them. Comply with the laws that apply to you, but make it clear in your policy that you will not tolerate marijuana use in the workplace, bringing marijuana into the workplace, or employees being impaired by or under the influence of marijuana. You're going to comply with the laws. You need to know the laws that apply to you, especially with pre-employment testing, because a lot of these legal marijuana laws now on a state-by-state basis talk specifically about pre-employment testing. I think pre-employment testing is important. I think it's worth waiting a little longer to find a person who can pass that pre-employment drug test, but know what the marijuana laws in your state say about testing applicants for THC. And then don't let the legal marijuana laws scare you. Don't let the map intimidate you. You still have the right to address marijuana in the workplace. Now, let me talk about oral fluid testing for a minute, and that's going to take us into a discussion of some of the federal regulations that are relatively new. So as I mentioned before, there's really only a handful of legitimate legal drug testing methods. And by legal, I mean states that recognize these drug testing methods specifically. Urine laboratory-based testing, point of collection or rapid result urine testing, hair testing, lab-based oral fluid testing, and point of collection or rapid result oral fluid testing. When we talk to clients about drug testing, these are the drug testing methods that we advise them to consider. I wouldn't go with an outlier drug testing system, because you're not going to find one that's FDA cleared. You're not going to find one that's specifically mentioned in state laws, and you're not going to find any that have federal regulations to guide you in how to use those other testing methods. But you will with urine, you will with oral fluid, and you will with hair. Let me explain, where I'm coming at with that. And as you may know, if you're covered under the DOT regulations, urine testing through a laboratory, through a SAMHSA certified laboratory, almost said NIDA certified, that gets away my age a little bit, but in a SAMHSA certified laboratory, it's not only been the #1 tested method. 85% of employers say that they use urine testing, but up to now, it's the only testing method allowed and required by DOT. Federal lab-based urine testing guidelines have been in existence for over 3 decades, and it's legal in every state. You don't have a problem getting, your policy updated if you're doing urine testing. Lab-based oral fluid testing has been endorsed by SAMHSA. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. In 2019, there is now a DOT notice of proposal rulemaking that will make lab-based oral fluid testing possible for DOT covered employers. That just came out February 28th of this year. It's the only government endorsed recent use detection method. You know, when we look at the ability to detect a recent drug use within just minutes, oral fluid testing is the only one that the government has come out with guidelines on. And it currently is already legal in 47 states. Just Vermont, Maine, and Hawaii, up till now, don't allow it. Now that DOT's come out with proposed guidelines for oral fluid, which will, you know, someday be finalized, then you'll see those other 3 states, probably Vermont and Maine for sure, allow lab-based oral fluid testing for non-DOT. I don't know about Hawaii yet. In Hawaii, rapid result oral fluid testing is already permitted, but for some reason there's a little bugaboo in their state law on lab-based oral fluid testing. I think that'll change, but Maine and Vermont, I predict, will definitely allow lab-based oral fluid testing once the DOT regulations are finalized. Hair testing is legal in most states as well. And there was a SAMHSA notice of proposed rulemaking for hair testing back in 2020. So it's next in line after lab-based oral fluid testing. I'm not predicting when DOT will ever do that because SAMHSA hasn't finalized guidelines for hair testing yet. I think that day will come. I think hair testing is important. I think it has a place in certain industries, but it's still a ways behind lab-based oral fluid testing and certainly lab-based urine testing. Now, when you compare urine, oral fluid, hair, and I put blood on here just so you can see by comparison, because a lot of the really smart people in our industry consider blood to be the gold standard of detecting drugs in the body. So just put it on there so you can compare it, but it's not really practical, nor is it allowed legally in most states for workplace drug testing. But if you look at lab-based or rapid result, you've got the option with urine and oral fluid, not with hair and blood. If you look at window of detection, you've got a 3 to 4 day window of detection with urine, up to 12 hours for THC with oral fluid, 24 to 48 hours for other drugs. Hair testing, after that 7+ day window of, you know, that sort of period of time in which the drug becomes detectable in hair, then past that period, you've got up to 90 days. Blood usually is about 2 to 3 days. Just scan down a little bit to the bottom though, without going through this entire chart, because you're going to have this to go through. The detection of other drugs is critical. Remember, I showed you the increase in marijuana use and marijuana positives, but I also showed you the dramatic increase in other drugs like opioids and amphetamines. With urine, oral fluid, and hair, you can detect virtually all drugs. With urine and oral fluid, definitely alcohol, also with hair in at least one lab that I know of. But with other drug testing methods, these outlier methods, you're not necessarily able to detect all drugs. Like breath, for example, only detects marijuana. And I'm going to have a prediction about marijuana testing here in a minute. So you want to go with a testing method that detects all the drugs that people use and not just one drug or 4 drugs or 5 drugs. So I think there are some advantages to oral fluid testing. A lot of this comes from some surveys that we've done in the past. Many people considered one of the advantages of oral fluid testing that it eliminates the yuck factors typically associated with urine testing. An oral fluid collection is far less invasive. You never have to worry about matching the gender of the collector and the donor because we're not using bathrooms. We're not removing any clothes or anything of that nature with oral fluid. It's less invasive, much easier to collect. Every oral fluid collection is fully observable, 100% from start to finish, and that makes drug test cheating virtually impossible. I went onto a website that offers advice and products on how to cheat, how to pass a drug test when you shouldn't. And this was a direct quote from one of those websites about oral fluid testing. The only guarantee of passing an oral fluid drug test is refraining from drug use during the detection period of 1 to 4 days prior to the test. That was the best advice a drug test cheating website could offer its users for passing an oral fluid test. Oral fluid samples can be used to detect virtually any drug. I talked about that. Detects recent use, typically considered union friendly because of the tighter window of detection, eliminates that cross-gender concern that I talked about, and as I'm going to show later in the ROI section of today's presentation, it actually saves you money, and I'll come back to that in more detail. Now, there are some trends right now that I think align well with testing with oral fluid. It detects recent use, it covers the entire window of impairment for marijuana, easy to administer, and aligns very well with a growing trend in our industry of telehealth collections, where you have somebody in a remote location with 30-something% of companies now being fully remote. remote workplaces, telehealth collections, I think, is a wave of the future that's going to be very popular. Oral fluid aligns with that very well because of the oral fluid collection is much easier to do. It doesn't involve somebody revealing themselves in any way with a urine test, etc. Socially distanced, in the age of COVID, obviously very important, and it eliminates cheating. About 10 to 12% of all drug test urine collections have been subverted in some way, according to one study. We've got a new report coming out on that, so I'll be able to share some information from that at the NDASA conference. Now, we did ask employers, which drug testing method do you use? And no surprise, 85% said lab-based urine testing, almost 36% said instant urine testing. Look at oral fluid in the middle, just over 12% for instant oral fluid, 21.6% for lab-based oral fluid testing, 24% for hair testing. So if you combine the instant oral fluid and the lab-based, it's about 33, 34%. But if we had asked this question years ago, instant oral fluid testing probably would have been maybe 5%, maybe 4%, lab-based would have been about the same, maybe a total of somewhere between 6 and 8% of drug tests. So it shows a dramatic increase here. And when we asked if you were considering adding any testing method, 5.5% said, yes, we're considering adding oral fluid testing. Some of that instant testing in the 2.96% bar could also be oral fluid and urine. This is significant, again, because we're seeing a significant growth in oral fluid testing. And in fact, in last year's 2021 survey of drug testing providers, we asked if you were offering oral fluid testing. In 2021, 73% of drug testing providers said, yes, we offer oral fluid testing. And that's up from 63% in 2020 and up from 37% in 2019. And I think the DOT notice of proposed rulemaking and in its final version, when that comes out, it's only going to increase that level of interest. But that's significant here, right? To go from 37% of drug testing providers saying, yes, we offer oral fluid testing, to 73% just 2 years later is a dramatic increase in the number of drug testing providers who feel that oral fluid testing is going to be a significant part of the future. Now, a lot of that has to do with SAMHSA oral fluid guidelines and the DOT notice of proposed rulemaking. So those SAMHSA guidelines came out in October of 2019. On the screen, I'm not going to read all of these to you, but on the screen, you see those orange phrases by each of the bullets. Those were the main reasons why SAMHSA said they had finalized guidelines for lab-based oral fluid testing for federal workplaces, not federally mandated programs like DOT or NRC, but federal workplaces, okay? About, that's somewhere around 150,000 drug tests a year, thereabouts, okay? But these were some of the reasons: enhanced flexibility, versatility, decreased invalid tests, drug test cheating, saves time, and versatility in detection, offering the ability to detect drugs immediately after somebody uses the drug. But here's what they said about the science of oral fluid testing. And I'm gonna read this quote to you because it relates to the next section of my presentation. So from the SAMHSA guidelines that came out in October of 2019, they said, quote, the scientific basis for the use of oral fluid as an alternative specimen, alternative to urine, for drug testing has now been broadly established, and the advances in the use of oral fluid in detecting drugs have made it possible for this alternative specimen to be used in federal programs with the same level of confidence that has been applied to the use of urine. Think about that for a moment. Scientifically, what SAMHSA is telling us is that there's no difference between lab-based urine and lab-based oral fluid testing. They are at the same level in terms of reliability, accuracy, scientific stability, urine and oral fluid lab-based testing. Now, February 28th of this year, finally, after much speculation, the Department of Transportation came out with a notice proposed rulemaking that will ultimately permit lab-based oral fluid testing of DOT-regulated employers and employees. This is the most significant change, the most significant advancement in the federal regulations in 3 decades. I know the people at DOT. I like them. They're very smart. They're very careful. They really know their stuff. And it took them a lot of years. I'm not saying it took them 30 years, but it's taken them somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 years to finally do this. Now, they could not have done it if SAMHSA hadn't come out with final guidelines, because it's through the SAMHSA guidelines, Part 40, that labs will be certified to do oral fluid testing, that MROs will be trained in how to look at oral fluid results, that collectors will know how to do oral fluid collections, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But with that in place, DOT was then free to give serious consideration to lab-based oral fluid testing. And those 7 bullets below there are the reasons they said they were now going to move to allow lab-based oral fluid testing: to combat drug test cheating, to make all collections perfectly observable, which of course thwarts drug test cheating, the cost savings that they estimate, quick and easy specimen collections, fewer requirements for collection facilities to meet, that tighter window of detection compared to urine and hair, and the ability to detect recent drug use. All of those were factors in DOT's decision to come out with a notice of proposed rulemaking for oral fluid testing. Now, when SAMHSA came out with their guidelines in October 2019, they estimated what the transition rate would be in the federal workplace for oral fluid testing, from urine to oral fluid testing. And they estimated that in the first year after the implementation period, about 7% of the 150,000 annual drug tests of federal employees would be oral fluid. They would transition to oral fluid. And in about 4 years, they estimated that that transition rate would be about 25 to 30%. SAMHSA also estimated at that time the same transition rate for the 6 million plus annual DOT mandated drug tests. In other words, somewhere around 1.5 plus million DOT tests would eventually transition to oral fluid once the oral fluid, lab-based oral fluid testing guidelines came out from DOT. Think about that in terms of the final bullet on the page. If 25 to 30% of the entire workplace drug testing market of about 40 million drug tests a year transitioned from mostly urine testing to oral fluid testing, we're looking at least 10 million, maybe up to 16 million or more oral fluid drug tests when you combine the non-mandated market with the DOT mandated market. Well, that's a significant increase in market share. Most people think that market share right now for oral fluid testing is maybe about 8%. But if we're at 25 to 30% of market share, you can see why over 70% of drug testing providers are now offering oral fluid testing, because they see the writing on the wall. And if I were to make a prediction, I think the transition will be more than 30% in about 5 to 6 years. I think we'll see a much more robust percentage of tests being oral fluid for a lot of different reasons. But some of it were some of the flaws that we had in our industry related to urine testing that were revealed by the COVID-19 pandemic, when it became nearly impossible for some companies to get a urine collection done at an offsite collection site, because those folks doing a great job, but they were dealing with COVID. And a lot of companies complained that they weren't able to get urine tests collected. I think that's why we started to see an increase in oral fluid testing. And I think that's among the reasons why a lot of companies will not go back to urine testing if they already moved over. My advice would be to look at doing both, depending on the circumstances. Maybe a pre-employment test might be a urine test, and a post-accident reasonable suspicion, or maybe even a RANDA test would be an oral fluid test. I wouldn't abandon urine testing by any means. And I think going forward, it'll still be a very dominant part of our industry. I just think you're going to see a dramatic increase in oral fluid testing. And a lot of it has to do with the return on investment that companies are starting to see from oral fluid testing, especially the dramatic decrease in drug test samples that cannot be tested at the laboratory because they've been subverted in some way. If you're worried about detecting recent use, legal marijuana laws, gender concerns between the collector and the donor, drug test cheating, certainly the time and the cost factors associated with shy bladder syndrome, the lost productivity of sending workers away to offsite collection sites for 2 or 3 hours at a time, sometimes accompanied by a supervisor, and the overall cost of drug testing because of tightening corporate budgets. then you might want to consider oral fluid testing going forward. Let me just put a few numbers in front of you in terms of measuring the return on investment of urine and oral fluid testing compared to each other. Now, these numbers could be whatever you want them to be, right? Because I don't know what you're paying for a drug test, but let's use these numbers because they're pretty generic and probably applicable in many situations. So the price that the end user, meaning the employer, not the TPA, but the employer, is going to pay for a collection could be about $15. If you're using a Quest Patient Service Center, it's going to be less. If you're using a third party, it could be $15 or much higher, depending on the time of day, where it's located, etc. With oral fluid, we're going to put 0 there because we do have the option of not using a professional collector for oral fluid testing. That was one of the things articulated in both the SAMHSA and the DOT guidelines that came out. The price the end user pays for the lab analysis, okay? Bundled, so I'm talking, or a bundled price is what I'm looking at here, collection, confirmation, and MRO. I'm going to charge a lot more for the oral fluid test for my example here than the urine test. The urine I'm going to put at $18. I know it could be less, okay, but I'm going to put $25 in here. I'm not going to charge for confirmation on either one of these for my analysis here, but I'm going to throw $5 more into the MRO on the urine side. But I could do the same for the oral fluid. So I come up with a total, just the way I have the numbers here, $38 to $25. So already there's a cost saving with oral fluid. If we want to put in the MRO of $5 on the oral fluid side, then it's $38 to $30, okay? But it's still a pretty significant savings right now. Now look at the time away from work that's associated with sending somebody to an offsite collection site versus taking, say, 15 minutes to get somebody tested at work, on site. So the lost work time for the worker at an hourly rate of $10.10, being gone an hour and 30 minutes, 1.5 hours, is $15.15. That 1.5 is generous, right? Because you and I both know that that very often that worker is gone for 2 to 3 hours. On the oral fluid side, it's only going to take me about 15 minutes to conduct that test on site in the workplace. I'm going to have one of my employees do it, so I'm not incurring any professional fees. It's going to cost me $2.53 of that worker's time. They're gone from the job. They're not producing their services or the product that I paid them for when they're doing a drug test. The difference is when they're at an offsite collection facility voiding a urine sample, it's going to take at least an hour and a half or longer. With oral fluid in the workplace, it's going to take about 15 minutes. If it's a reasonable suspicion or post-accident test, then I've got to send a supervisor with them, obviously. So at $24 an hour, which is low, I get that as well. I'm trying to be fair with the numbers. At an hour and a half, that's $36 for that same supervisor or employee to oversee, observe the oral fluid collection on site. I'm putting in $6 of that individual's time for about 15 minutes of their time. I didn't put any fringe rate in there of about 40% for healthcare costs and taxes and things of that. You can calculate those things in there. But for urine testing, doing it this way, I add another $51 to my total cost. These are the soft dollars, and about $8.53 for the urine. So my total is $89 for a urine test versus $33 for an oral fluid test. And admittedly, a lot of that is in the soft dollar savings of not having to send somebody to an offsite collection site. If you decide to do oral fluid testing, you may still decide to send them to an offsite collection site or bring a professional technician into the workplace to observe that collection. In that case, you're going to observe some costs on the oral fluid side. But you have the option, according to the SAMHSA guidelines that came out in 2019 and the notice of proposed rulemaking from DOT that came out this year, to not do that, to just have an employee trained by the provider of the oral fluid test so that they can do it themselves. You may use a telehealth collection app where you just have somebody observing the individual via video in a remote location, going through the process, making sure that they fill out the paperwork correctly, et cetera, et cetera. That all affects the cost, but just the way we presented the numbers here, we're looking at a savings of about 62.4%. So in conclusion, I think drug testing is here to stay. That should stay right there. That's my fault. And you can go through these, but I think a lot of it has to do with the availability of alternative testing methods. I think because there are certain things that are happening right now, like concerns about sending people to offsite collection sites, exposure to germs that typically may be more prevalent in a place where sick people gather. The fact that companies are concerned about their corporate budgets because of economic situations, et cetera, and the legalization of marijuana, which has to be concerned about that window of impairment. I think that there's going to be an ongoing need for drug testing, and these things are going to influence that process. So I predict going forward, we're going to see a lot more oral fluid testing, more rapid oral fluid testing, more on-site collections in the workplace by trained employees, more point of collection testing utilizing telehealth apps. I think we'll see a combination of oral fluid testing with fitness for duty screening systems that don't look at why somebody's impaired, that simply just measures the person's fitness for duty to say, drive a truck that day. I think we will see less testing for marijuana. We're already seeing that. But I think over the next 5 years, we'll see a dramatic drop in employers testing for marijuana on a pre-employment or random test, mostly post-accident and reasonable suspicion. And I think we'll also see more need for and more testing for expanded panels, like that includes opioids, amphetamines, psychotherapeutic drugs, as well as barbiturates and benzodiazepines. That's what I think the future looks like. So let's look at some questions now. Jessica, what do we have from our audience?
Thank you, Bill. We have a few questions. The first question is, do labs have a way to retest specimens like they do with urine if someone were to contest the results with an oral fluid test?
Yeah, so in the SAMHSA guidelines, which DOT will adhere to, right? Because the 49 CFR Part 40, that's how drug testing gets conducted. So that's what DOT will live by, what was in those SAMHSA guidelines from 2019. It does call for a split specimen of an oral fluid sample. How that occurs is still being debated. But yes, you will be able to test the same sample or a concurrently collected sample or sequentially collected sample with oral fluid testing in a way similar to urine testing. Many state laws require that. Many state drug testing laws outside of the DOT regulations require the employer to confirm or to retest a sample, the same sample, or a second sample from the original collection. That's why some of these alternative testing methods will have a tough time catching on, because you can't really capture a second sample at the same time, or the lab can't split the sample when it gets there. So yes, you will be able to do that. Go back and look at those SAMHSA guidelines, and you'll see that they have that specifically in the guidelines going forward.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Another question, you touched on this just a little bit earlier in the presentation, but if you could just give us a little more information. A rapid or POCT test would be different in its processing than a lab-based oral fluid test, or are they similar?
Well, the answer is they're similar, but they are different. One of the things you need to look at when using a point of collection test, and I love some of the technologies that's out there for both urine and oral fluid, but especially oral fluid rapid result testing. You want to look at the package insert that comes with the device. Look at that, what it can do in terms of the sensitivity and the specificity, the rate of true positives versus the rate of true negatives, to make sure that you're getting a test that's going to be somewhat comparable to either lab-based urine or lab-based oral fluid testing. Lab-based urine and lab-based oral fluid testing are virtually identical in not in the science. Okay, there's a difference in how they get analyzed in some technical ways. But with point of collection testing, whether it's urine or oral fluid testing, there are differences. I like a lot of the technologies that's out there now. When possible, I would look for an FDA cleared device, if possible, and a laboratory that specializes in confirming oral fluid samples that come from an instant device. I guess the bottom line there is that if you get a positive from an instant result device, a non-negative, you're going to want to send that sample into the laboratory to get it confirmed.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. You mentioned the notice of proposed rulemaking with the DOT, and also the HHS came out just recently with a comment period. What can people who are on this call with us today do to share their feedback and comments and participate in those processes?
Yeah, very easy to find those the DOT notice of proposed rulemaking. It came out on February 28th in the Federal Register. And in there, you'll see a list of questions. It's a list of questions with lots of explanations for each one of them, where they're asking for comment from the public. And so you can go in there and you can find specifically what they're requesting input from the public on. You've got till April 29th, I think is the deadline for, they extended it to the end of April, basically. So you've got till then to submit your comments, but it's very easy to find that information in that Federal Register notice of proposed rulemaking from February 28th. Easy to go on, do Google search on DOT oral fluid drug testing NPRM, and it will be the first thing that comes up.
Great, thank you very much. So our last, I just wanted to address this. There was more of a request than a question, but it was about the statistics that support the study from Australia that you mentioned earlier. And I just wanted to vocally share that with the group, that when we send you out the recording to this presentation, we'll update the information to include that statistic, as well, as I'm sure many of you would like to have that information. We're coming up to the top of the hour, and though we have a couple more questions, they may be more lengthy answers, and so we're happy to contact you offline to make sure you have that information. So if you've submitted a question today, please know that we will contact you offline, and we appreciate your attendance at today's webinar. We'd like to remind you that today's presentation did qualify for credits from SHRM and from CCDAP for those who are interested and who also attended the full live presentation. We'd like to thank DrugPak for sponsoring today's webinar presentation. Of course, as you know, Current Consulting Group is always a resource to you, but so is DrugPak, as if you have questions about what you heard in their video at the beginning of the presentation and want to learn more about their services, please reach out to them. Their contact information is on the screen as well. And so with this, we'll go ahead and conclude today's webinar. Thank our presenters, thank our sponsors, and of course, thank you for attending today's webinar. Have a great day.